Newcastle United have beaten Arsenal in the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final by 2-0, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the incredible way in which they did it, including how they carved through Arsenal's fantastic defence and a crazy defensive tactic that got themselves the win. While Newcastle had far less possession in this match, they were pretty comfortable in the way that they were able to stop Arsenal from progressing the ball, and that was their dominance through this midfield area, starting out with a midfield three of Tonali, Willock and Joelinton, obviously missing out on their talisman in Bruno Guimaraes. The way they combated Arsenal's progression to the centre of the pitch was really impressive, and they did this through essentially pinning a man-mark system into these areas, looking far more like a 4-2-3-1, but just operating to try and man-mark these players in Martin Odegaard and in Declan Rice, preventing those runs into these channels and really stopping the space for Odegaard to start to link play. Arsenal decided to try and invert to overload this midfield area, and in doing so it dragged Murphy infield, but that was fine because it still allowed for Newcastle to operate this man-marking system, and it prevented Arsenal's progression through the centre of the pitch, essentially hitting a wall. This forced them out into these wide areas, forcing Martinelli and Trossard to have 1v1 duels with both Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento, and in Hall's case he was really comfortable against Trossard, winning that duel more often than not. Martinelli got to the byline occasionally, but still Livramento managed to get the upper hand on a couple of those duels, and it meant that Newcastle were pretty comfortable, and then it allowed them to go on the attack themselves. This is an example of what I'm talking about, and you can see it pretty clearly right here. So you've got Joe Willock pressing onto Declan Rice right now, but he's going to move over to Thomas Partey once the ball gets passed. You've then got Joelinton pressing up onto Declan Rice, and look at this dynamic right here. Sandro Tonali onto Martin Odegaard. This is key, and it's limiting the space that Odegaard has to be able to work with. It just so happens that Arsenal managed to get out of this pretty comfortably, and it creates a chance for themselves. But this is the idea that Newcastle went with, and it really did stifle the way that Arsenal wanted to go forwards. You've then also got Miles Lewis-Skelly with Jacob Murphy, and you've got Alexander Isak able to pressurise the two Arsenal centre-backs once the ball gets rotated round the back of that defence. But it's this midfield area that Newcastle really started to get the upper hand in through their aggression, through their tenacity, and eventually they would start to get those turnovers to allow themselves to create their own opportunities. And the opportunities that they did create were converted into major chances. Just like this one right here. This is in the build-up to the Newcastle goal from a free kick within Newcastle's half. Now, the interesting thing is the really high line that Arsenal are operating with right here. Teams do it all of the time. You start with your really high line and then you drop back. But if you don't drop back fast enough to be able to deal with the runs in beyond, it can become quite chaotic. And if you don't win the first header, it then starts to become a real dangerous problem. So you've got these two players here. You've got Burn and you've got Botman. Now the key thing here is that when Burn is challenging, Arsenal are really finding it difficult to deal with him. You've then got Botman, who has essentially got a free run to try and stop this Arsenal player right here from winning that header. And that's exactly what happens. So when it actually gets won by Botman in the air, you've got a whole heap of problems because Arsenal aren't properly set, and this is down to them having to retreat a number of yards to be able to deal with that threat in behind. We are going to notice Jacob Murphy right here because his touch is absolutely sublime once that knock-on happens. I want to focus on this because this touch, to be able to take it from left to right for him, from left to right, is absolutely fantastic. It drags Declan Rice away while shielding the ball at the same time. The other Arsenal player isn't able to get there either because he misses out on that opportunity. And as Jacob Murphy takes that touch, it just takes these two Arsenal players away in that singular moment. It's an amazing touch, and it gives Alexander Isak the opportunity to slot it home. Jacob Murphy's touch is a little bit heavy, but I think that actually helps Isak and gives him the space to be able to take that chance. And the striker that he is, he's always going to convert that. It's a fantastic goal, and it puts Newcastle 1-0 up. And before too long into the second half, Newcastle were 2-0 up, and this is absolutely sensational. We're going to be breaking down this goal because it's just pure class. Let's focus on Arsenal for a second, because Arsenal are set up in their 4 midfield shape. their forward defensive shape. The left back is just on the other side, and you've got their 2 players ahead. So a 4-4-2 in defensive shape, essentially. And what you've got is Sandro Tonali on the ball here. Isak, who is arguably one of the best strikers in the league currently, a player that Arsenal really, really like, is going to make a movement into this space right here. The space between Declan Rice and Thomas Partey in the centre of midfield. Now, this is key, because as he makes this run, look at this, as he makes this run, he's the only person making that movement. You've got Saliba and Gabriel who aren't ready and aren't working with it. They're not ready. And if you see here, both of them are pointing either to one another or to someone, saying, you've got to mark him, you've got to make sure he's there. But they don't take the initiative. They don't take the aggression towards this. And it gives Isak the time and space in this moment to be able to turn. Arsenal do a good job of phasing him out towards the outside of that block, essentially. And when he turns, it's then about this player. It's then about Jacob Murphy, a player who doesn't necessarily get too much plaudits, too much credit, but when he makes this movement, it gives Isak a great chance to make this pass. Martinelli isn't aware, and the aggression from Arsenal I just don't quite think is sufficient enough to be able to stop Newcastle progressing. So Jacob Murphy now has quite a bit of space to pick his head up, either recycle possession back round or to try and play a forward-thinking pass. We also need to make sure that we're keeping our eyes on Alexander Isak, because he's the player that's going to be picking up the ball once Murphy passes. He's not happy with the singular pass that he made. He wants to get towards the box, and that's what makes him a top-class striker. So as the ball gets played on, this pass right here from Jacob Murphy into this box right here is absolutely sensational, because it takes out Martinelli and Lewis Skelly, but it also stops both Declan Rice and Gabriel from making an interception. You've still got Alexander Isak making that movement into the box, and as he plays that pass, it gives a good chance for Alexander Isak to give a touch, to get a moment into the box. This is fantastic. And then this touch right here from Isak, from left to right, to give himself a shooting opportunity. I mean, he's been marked by 3 players. They understand the gravity of the situation, the Arsenal players. They are panicking because they don't want him to take a shot. He is lethal in front of goal, and he gets that opportunity. He swings it over Gabriel's foot and gets a shot off. If you look at this, Raya isn't set. Alexander Isak has shot. He is not set quite yet. He makes a fantastic save, and then it's about Anthony Gordon on the other side being that little bit more composed, anticipating a little bit better than Yuri and Timber, and he manages to slot it home. It's absolutely fantastic, and Arsenal were carved apart by that brilliant Newcastle play, and it was opened up by that pass from Alexander Isak, the movement from him, and then the shot. Just fantastic. And then to see out the game, to take that 2-0 lead back to St James's Park, Eddie Howe made a really interesting tactical change. Defensively, he made them nearly impossible for Arsenal to break through, and he did that through changing their formation from their 4-3-3 that they normally use to a 5-5-0. You heard that correct, a 5-5-0. They took off Alexander Isak, they brought on an extra centre-back, they brought on an extra midfielder, changed the 2 wingers to give themselves an out to be able to run forwards, and they had 5 midfielders and 5 defenders. And what this did was because of the compactness of play that Newcastle had, because the defensive line and the midfield line were so close together, it meant that there was no space for these Arsenal players to operate in. It meant that Martin Odegaard was essentially nullified, forcing him into areas outside of this box, or even to try and overload on certain situations. But he still was not able to get there because of the great aggression from these Newcastle players, from their ability to close down the space. And what it meant is that the space was always out on these wide areas. And this is how Arsenal tried to get through, but they failed to do so. Arsenal completed 42 crosses. They made 42 crosses in this match, and only 21% of them were actually through. Only 21% succeeded. And in tandem with that, Newcastle had an aerial duel win percentage of 71%. through Botman winning his headers, through Kelly, through Dan Burn. They were elite in the way that they were able to defend from those aerial situations, and Arsenal didn't have a way to break them down. They couldn't play through into these channels. They couldn't have movement from these right and left hand channels. They weren't able to beat them down the wings, and even if they did, they had to cross into the box to these three strong, powerful, tall centre-backs. Newcastle defended brilliantly. They didn't need an extra body to go forwards. They only needed to hold on to what they had, and they did it to remarkable effect. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. You have Newcastle's 5 defenders right here. You've got their 5 midfielders here as well, and they just sat in and defended their space. Look at where they're positioned as well, defending more or less the width of the penalty area, making sure that Arsenal have to go down these channels. They have to try and take this space because you can't go through the centre because of the lines that are being given by these Newcastle players. The space just isn't there in the centre of the park. Declan Rice is never going to get enough time and space here. You've got Martin Odegaard, who's made a movement over to this other channel to try and overload this situation, but there are too many Newcastle players. It's too well organised, and it means that Alexander Zinchenko, who currently has the ball here, has only one option, really. He can either recycle round or he can try and play down the line. But again, it's something that Newcastle want them to do. They're almost encouraging them to cross. And notice the line that Newcastle are holding as well. It's holding the line of the penalty area. They're not too deep. They're pressing up really high, really brave, and it means that the runs in beyond are probably going to be snuffed out as well. It was really well done by Newcastle, a unique tactical display, and something that gave them a huge leg up going into the second leg. And that's what I want to ask you guys about. What did you make of the game, and how do you think the second leg of this tie is going to play out? Is it going to be Arsenal or are Newcastle going to maintain their lead? Let me know your thoughts on their performance and the result in the comment section below. Thank you ever so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.